and I welcome you all to tonight's Ordinary Council meeting. I remind councillors that the meeting, other than the confidential meeting, is being recorded, and the audio recording will be made available publicly on our council website tomorrow. Our purpose is to provide greater access to council debate and decision making and encourage openness and transparency. However, council accepts no liability for any individual opinions or statements. Councillors and officers, please ensure you use microphones and they are turned on when speaking. I formally open this council meeting and ask that you all stand for the opening prayer and statement. We give thanks, O God, for the men and women of the past whose generous devotion to the common good has been the making of our city. Grant that our own generation may build worthily on the foundations they have laid. Direct our minds to all we plan and determine is for the well-being of our city. Amen. Amen. In the spirit of reconciliation, Whitehorse City Council acknowledges the Wurundjeri people as the traditional custodians of the land which we are meeting on. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present. Please be seated. I would now like to introduce our councillors and senior officers this evening. Councillors on my left, Councillor Raylene Carr.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome.
Councillor Bill Bennett.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome.
Councillor Blair Barker.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Councillor Tina Liu.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming tonight.
Councillor Sharon Ellis. Councillors on my right, Councillor Ben Stennett.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome.
Councillor Prue Cutts.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome.
Councillor Denise Massoud.
Good evening. Lovely to see you here.
Councillor Andrew Munro.
Good evening all, and Merry Christmas to you all.
Staff on my left, Chief Executive Officer Ms Nolene Duff.
Good evening.
General Manager Infrastructure Mr Philip Warner.
Good evening.
General Manager Corporate Services Mr Peter Smith.
Good evening.
Staff on my right, Executive Manager Governance and Customer Service Mr Tony DeFazio.
Good evening, everyone.
Team Leader Governance Ms Jenny Russell.
Good evening.
General Manager City Development Mr Jeff Green.
Good evening.
General Manager Human Services Ms Terry Wilkinson.
Good evening.
And in the gallery, Manager of Communications Ms Sally Freud. The next item on the agenda is apologies. There are none, so we'll move to disclosure of conflicts of interest. Councillors and officers, are there any disclosures of conflicts of interest in regard to matters to be considered on tonight's agenda? If so, I will require a disclosure of that interest and the nature of that interest. There being none, I'll move to the next item on the agenda, confirmation of minutes of previous meeting. Councillors, we have listed on the agenda the minutes from our last meeting requiring confirmation by council. Can I have a motion to confirm the minutes of the ordinary and confidential council meeting held on 20 November 2017?
Happy to move.
Happy to second.
I'll recognise Councillor Bennett to move. Seconder?
Need a second.
Councillor Ellis seconded. Is there any discussion? I'll put it straight to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Carried. The next item of the agenda is responses to questions. Council provides the opportunity for anyone present in the gallery to submit a question in writing on the forms provided, which is in accordance with Clause 18 of our Meeting Procedure Local Law, for which we will endeavour to provide a response. I will ask the Chief Executive Officer whether there are any questions submitted.
There are no questions this evening, Mayor.
Thank you. I'll move to the next item on the agenda, notices of motion. First being item 6.1, notice of motion 106. Councillor Barker. Is there a mover?
Yes, Mayor.
Is there? I'll call for a seconder.
I'll second, Mr Mayor.
Seconded Tina Liu. Councillor Barker.
Thanks, Mayor. With your guidance, do I need to read this out or should it be put on the screen?
Councillor Barker, the notice of motion's printed in the agenda, so it's not required to go on the screen. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, some background to this. A number of years ago, Manningham Council examined its growth trajectory and approved various high-rises and the sale of the Eastern Golf Course, which is now an intensive development, the Tullamore Estate. As part of the planning process, Manningham Council imposed massive cost on the developers to install the purple pipe in the buildings for recycled water. But ultimately, Manningham Council voted against giving Yarra Valley Water a planning permit for a treatment facility in Manningham. Now, earlier this year, Yarra Valley Water wrote to a considerable number of our constituents and Manningham's constituents saying they wanted input into a plan to effectively resurrect this project, Mayor, potentially on 2 sites in Whitehorse, Frank Sedgman Reserve, near Box Hill North Primary, and Eram Park, and a number of sites in Manningham, Ruffy Lake, and I think it was the Park and Ride as well. Now, the concept designs show a big industrial shed-like facility with storage tanks for chemicals. Yarra Valley have admitted that truckloads of solids, mainly excrement, and tankers with bulk chemicals will be rumbling through local streets to service this facility. Now, Yarra Valley Water went to our constituents, Mayor, and told them that they wanted to provide water to 5,000 homes on Doncaster Hill. Mayor, all of the utility and benefit for Manningham and all of the negatives and no benefits for Whitehorse. Say that again, all of the utility and benefit for Manningham and all of the negatives and no benefits for Whitehorse. Yes, really. Now, this didn't cause much of a stink originally because most people, including me, thought, okay, that's a good idea. We've already got one of these plants up at City Oval where you catch the storm water, put it through like a pool type filter thing, and reuse it to water the grass. Makes a lot of sense to me. Made a lot of sense to our constituents, Mr. Mayor. But the penny finally dropped because folk realised this wasn't about collecting storm water. It's actually a sewerage treatment plant, Mayor. Now, I accompanied a number of our residents to the information session, and sure enough, there was no mention of a sewerage plant in Yarra Valley Water's happy storyboards. It was rather Orwellian. And my residents perceived the equivocating continued, which is sort of not telling the whole story. But now it was accompanied with the threat that there'd be compulsory acquisition in this project at some point anyway. Now, Mr. Mayor, like most Australians, my constituents have a very acute sense of natural justice, and they don't like equivocating. They have another word for it, which I'll avoid tonight. My residents have a perception that they've been disrespected, Mayor, that they've been treated shabbily, and they're about to, what they call, be shafted. Now, it's important that we offer some very friendly and constructive advice, Mr. Mayor, to Yarra Valley Water. And I've got 4 points I'd like for everyone to consider with this thing. 1, my constituents are angry and upset, and I'm sure the people at Ruffy Park and those around the Park and Ride are too. They're ready for pitched battle if one of our sites is chosen. It will be the mother of all excrement fights, Mayor. And when the brown, sticky, smelly stuff hits the fan, there's always collateral damage. Now, Yarra Valley Water might think they can win, and my residents get that, Mayor, because they're smart people. Yarra Valley Water will just acquire it. And of course, Yarra Valley Water, Mr. Mayor, run the risk of being the Black Knight from the Monty Python movie. It's sort of left being quite defiant, but it's got no arms and no legs, because it could end up being a very, very hollow victory for Yarra Valley Water when the residents, and I suspect there'll be a terrible toll on Yarra Valley Water's brand and reputation if this trajectory continues. So I'm calling on Yarra Valley Water 3, release the report now. Do not try and slip it out in the week prior to Christmas. This is what's called taking out the garbage. This is a very respected organisation and it's unbecoming. Our residents won't cop the loss of a park, the noise, the smell, the visual pollution, the trucks full of excrement, the chemical tankers. I ask Yarra Valley Water to have a think about it. They have some of the best engineers and access to the best engineers in the world. If you pick us, come back with a different proposal. Have a think. You've listened. Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding. Perhaps if we can't see it, hear it, smell it, and maybe a lease, say 200 grand a year goes into neighbouring properties, sporting clubs, environmental organisations. If seek leave to continue my comments, Mr Mayor, they won't take more than 5 seconds.
5 seconds.
Councillors, by
Barker.
supporting this motion, you are standing up for natural justice, you're filling your role as custodian of our lands, you're standing up for equitable outcomes, you're standing by the residents that elected you because they trust you. If Yarra Valley Water pick one of our sites, let's not have the mother of all excrement fights, let's nudge them in a more positive direction.
Councillor Barker, time's expired. Councillor Liu.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillors, I support this motion as I do have concerns that 2 of the proposed sites are City of Whitehorse land. Look, while I acknowledge that one of the proposed sites is located on the Manningham side of the freeway, nonetheless it's still within proximity of Elgar Ward homes, and also we need to consider the impact on our significant green space in the area. Now, this proposed recycled water plant essentially services Doncaster developments, and thus far it hasn't been clearly indicated if any benefits can be derived for the City of Whitehorse community. I also think that for transparency reasons, it is important for Yarra Valley Water to release the preferred site and results of the consultation process to really allow members of the community to further engage on this matter. Yarra Valley Water has indicated that the decision will be made soon, but I am concerned that we're fast approaching the festive season and people are or will be away, and this may impact on their ability to provide their input or comment regarding this particular matter. So I urge my fellow councillors to support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Liu. Are there any speakers against the motion? There being no speakers against the motion, are there any speakers for the motion? I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Carried. The next item of the agenda is item 6.2, notice of motion number 107, Councillor Bennett. Do I have a mover?
I'm moving.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Is there a seconder?
Happy to second.
Councillor Liu. Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Mayor. The motion that you see on the agenda, notice of motion 107, has to do with the recent selection by the state government and the North East Link Authority to choose option A for that particular link. This has implications for the City of Whitehorse and the municipality, and it's my strong view that we need to send a clear message to the authority and the state government that we oppose their decision to choose this option A. And we're opposing it because there's a lot of unknowns and a lot of details that haven't been provided by the North East Link Authority. And I think that we need to understand what things like the environmental impacts might be for the widening, proposed widening of the Eastern Freeway by up to 7 additional lanes from Springvale Road. So what are the traffic implications in regard to this? What loss of public open space might be being planned to enable this to happen? We simply do not know the details, and that's why we're asking the questions through this formal motion. Now, I understand that a briefing has been arranged early in the new year from the North East Link Authority, and we look forward to that. That might answer some of the questions that our community has about this, and it's certainly something that will be welcome to keep the community fully informed. we need councillors to stand up and advocate strongly on behalf of our citizens and our city, and make it clear that we oppose this particular decision. So having said that, I'm not in favour of taking a position on any of the other options. There's 4 options, as you know, for the simple reason that they were devoid of any real detail as well. So to take a position and state a preference from a position of ignorance, in my view, is not a strategically wise thing to do. We must concentrate, I think, on having a clear position as far as our opposition to option A is concerned, and then advocate for the best outcomes for our residents and our city. So, councillors, I seek your support for this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Councillor Liu.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I support this motion, councillors. I'm actually quite disappointed that no further information has been provided to us regarding the North East Link, and I think both council and our community deserve to be fully informed regarding this proposed project. And one thing that I would also like to mention is just regarding this project potentially impacting our surrounding parks, bushlands, open spaces, as well as the traffic in the area. I think given the previous motion regarding Yarra Valley Water proposed plant, and the possibility of it being located in this area, as well as planned works in Coonung wetlands, including the new boardwalk and future plans for Elgar Park, it may further erode on our already precious open spaces in Whitehorse and surrounding municipalities. So I do urge my fellow councillors to support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Liu. Are there any speakers against the motion? Are there any speakers in favour of the motion?
Yes, Mayor.
Councillor Barker.
Thanks, Mayor. I understand that in a project the size of these sorts of road projects, there is a conceptual design, a little bit like, the concept design we see when we do, buildings, if you like, and that the devil is invariably always in the detail. Now, Coonung Creek Trail, Mayor, is one of the most loved and used parks, walking and bicycle, dog walking, cricket, hockey, you name it. It is incredibly valued to us. It's an arterial bicycle route. And I would hate to see that that's damaged. And with the addition of 7 lanes to the Eastern Freeway, I can only see that footprint of the Eastern Freeway, particularly in North Balwyn, which is the very far edge of our ward, Mr Mayor, in Jocelyn Street, which is in North Balwyn. Down at the bottom of Winfield Road, you'll note that if you've ever been on that bike path there's the big ravine on one side and it's cut quite close to the other. Now, for these residents, if that, all of a sudden the freeway, they haven't been told that there's going to be any compulsory acquisition. I've been and door knocked on their homes. But if all of a sudden the freeway at the moment is 25 metres from their back fence and it is noisy, and now all of a sudden with this new 7 lanes, the freeway's 5 centimetres from their back fence, that has a very material impact on these people's lives, and they're not necessarily having their homes compulsorily acquired. So that really concerns me. In the absence of that information, we need to take a strong stand on this, Mayor and councillors, to stand up for our people and to stand up for our lands. And I'd finally also draw you to the wetlands and the boardwalk, Mr Mayor. And myself and Councillor Liu were there when we started the consultation, and in this chamber we've invested $500,000, or I think it was, of our ratepayers' money on that new boardwalk, because people really love it, Mayor. I was a little bit unfussed about it until we did some consultation on social media, and it was uniform. People absolutely love it. And to think that this Daniel Andrews is going to push his bulldozers through, potentially push his bulldozers through a wetland that we've invested $500,000 of their money on, Mr Mayor, concerns me. Councillors, please support this motion. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Barker. Are there any other speakers?
Mr Mayor.
Okay. Councillor Munro.
Mr Mayor, also speaking in favour of the motion. While option A may be the cheapest of the three options that have been presented, I think it's the least adequate of the options. It's a short-term fix and it will lead to long-term problems. Councillors, some of you may be aware there were rail disruptions earlier last week. So Monday and Tuesday, because I had council commitments in the evening, I drove the Eastern Freeway to park at Victoria Park Station and Clifton Hill Station, respectively, on the Monday and Tuesday. Those freeways, the freeway on those days, because of the rail disruption, were totally clogged, even at 9:30 in the morning, and it took me over 3 hours to get to work on Tuesday morning as a consequence. What we don't need is more traffic being pumped onto the Eastern Freeway between the tunnels and Hoddle Street. And councillors, that's my grave concern about option A. It is a short-term fix, but it doesn't give the city the long-term benefit that it needs. The ring road was designed to be a freight corridor to divert traffic around Melbourne and to other parts of Australia. So to serve the western parts, industrial parts of Melbourne, and to take traffic onto the Hume Freeway and beyond, to take traffic down to the Geelong Freeway, both to and from for that industrial area. And the advantage of completing the ring road is to open up the southeast of Melbourne, Dandenong, and all of those tremendous industrial areas, and even there's some industrial areas through Whitehorse to a limited extent, to open that up to get around Melbourne, to get to the north of Melbourne, to get to Geelong and beyond. But pumping traffic into the Eastern Freeway, you can see the problem. The Melbourne Tunnel is constrained. It's a three-way constraint, and for people who do use the Eastern Freeway, you will know, and even on the Tuesday, while the city end was, by the time I got on it, was clear, there had been an accident or something that basically blocked the tunnels, and those boom gates do come down from time to time at the tunnels. So pumping more traffic to the west into Hoddle Street precinct without adequate space for them to go, for those vehicles to go, is a poor solution. Pumping traffic into those tunnels, which was not designed to carry that volume of freight traffic, is a poor outcome. It needs to be a proper ring road. It needs to carry freight. It's not about people in their cars. We should be encouraging people to use public transport in terms of their commute to work, but for tradies and for industrial freight, for our goods and services that need to be moved on the road, it needs to move around Melbourne more freely, and option A does not present that, and I would encourage the government to reconsider.
Thank you, Councillor Munro. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Stennett.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to speak in support. I guess a lot's been said already, but basically I think it's worthwhile thinking about what this road should be, what it shouldn't be, what it is and what it isn't. And what it isn't, it's not a link and it's not a ring road. What it is, it's a northern freeway into the city. It does not achieve the intent, the original intent of an orbital ring road. What it will do is destroy our parkland. What it will do is almost certainly kill Doncaster Rail. And if you don't think that's an issue, think about what would happen tomorrow if we switched off the Lilydale-Belgrave line. How many people in cars would there have to be on the extra cars on the Eastern Freeway to compensate for all those tens of thousands of commuters in trains? And you think about the benefit, the real long-term benefits of getting people out of cars that are going to the city and building heavy rail that can take that capacity into the city. The expansion of the Eastern Freeway has been mentioned before. What we're going to see is years of disruption and pain as it's being built. And even once it's built, what you're going to see is effectively choke points on either side of the expanded freeway. You're going to see worse traffic congestion on the Eastern Freeway. I've heard it described as a bit like a Christmas cracker. It's wide on the outside and they're twisted on the ends. And that's what we're going to see in the Eastern Freeway. And you want to talk about noise and congestion, you're going to get not extra cars, extra trucks travelling on the freeway on lanes that are right next door to people's homes. There is no possible way you can make effective noise barriers when you have a freeway that wide. Those people along the freeway are going to have their lives utterly destroyed. And what compensation will they receive? Nothing. Probably nothing. Because their land isn't being directly affected. Their homes aren't necessarily being compulsorily acquired, but that doesn't mean their lives aren't going to be affected. This is a short-term solution to our long-term problem. It is simply a cheap and nasty, cost-driven option. Nothing the North East Link Association will convince me otherwise. This is being done for cost reasons and political reasons. And for the North East Link Association to come out and say otherwise is just totally rubbish. They are simply puppets of the state government that are driven by cost and politics, and this is just wrong. So we should absolutely oppose option A.
Thank you, Councillor Stennett. Are there any further speakers on the motion?
Yes, Mayor.
Councillor Cutts.
Thank you very much, Mayor. I also oppose the state government's decision for the selection of option A. Many of the reasons I would have mentioned have already been noted in the various debates, but also we need to look at what the Eastern Freeway actually is. If we look at the Eastern Freeway, we see lovely vegetation on the side. Now, it softens what would normally be, we'd think, a concrete jungle. Now, expand that out by 7 more lanes and this will be a hideous, hot amount of concrete that we're just dealing with, and all that vegetation will be removed. That concerns me very deeply, as well as the visual pollution and the noise pollution for all those homes and people living in their homes that they've paid good money for. Like Councillor Barker has mentioned just before, we've got Kett Street, which runs in Nunawading along there, so that will also be majorly affected in Councillor Stennett and my ward. So we've got these issues as well, and there are many other homes in the Blackburn area as well which are very affected, which run down to the freeway. I understand that Burundara and Manningham Council have also indicated that option A is not their preference as well. And according to others, do we put up another option? Option C, for example, has been often touted around. That does go through the Yarrandarran area, which of course is once again in our ward. We haven't seen sufficient information on that to then say this is a preference for us. So I stand with the other councillors in opposing option A. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cutts. I take your speech in favour of the motion. Are there any further speakers? Councillors, as there have been no speakers against the motion, I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. The next item on the agenda is petitions. Councillors, are there any petitions for tabling tonight? There being none, I'll move on to item number 8. Councillors, do we have any items of urgent business?
Yes, Mayor.
Councillor Massoud, can you please state the nature of your urgent business?
Thank you, Mayor. I'll try not to go into too much detail. It actually is the reason I am...
Councillor Massoud, just a topic of the urgent business.
I understand.
Thank
you. Yeah, the reason I am wanting to put this up as urgent business, it is regarding a particular street in Blackburn, Frankham Street, and I wish to bring it forward as urgent business. It has long had many arguments put up by the community, and it is challenged in terms of emergency services getting in and out, and also rubbish. I can certainly go into a lot more detail, but the sooner we can identify that this street is needs to be reviewed, it's currently in the residential growth zone, then the sooner that review can happen. There are risks in the longer term, and I think we should not delay that.
Thank you, Councillor Massoud. Is there a second? Councillor Massoud, do you wish to move a motion that that particular topic be considered as urgent business?
I do.
Is there a seconder for the motion?
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Carr, Councillor Massoud. this is to give an explanation on why we should consider the motion as urgent business.
Okay, all right. As I said, the issues within Frankham Street, Blackburn, were voiced by our community. They've identified risks. It has even been acknowledged with planning applications to VCAT by the members at VCAT. The street is currently residential growth zone. There is a compulsory conference at VCAT this Friday. I'm not sure whether tonight's decision would have any influence over that, but that's not the reason to not consider it tonight. The reality is that there's such conflict, and I would like to go into the detail to put the motion and actually talk to it in detail, that I believe we need to consider it. We need to say that there are occasionally streets that have conflicts that just don't fit within the zone, and we need to get officers to actually review the zoning. I think it's rare, but this is definitely a case where it does need to have some review, and I believe we should not be delaying it. There is a risk to the safety of residents if you had multiple emergency services getting in and then, say, the ambulance can't get out. And so therefore I say that it is an urgent piece of business, because we need to review that, and that really eventually gets down to the safety and security of residents.
Thank you, Councillor Masood. Councillor Carr?
Nothing further to add, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Any speakers against the motion of including an item in urgent business on Frankham Street? Councillor Munro.
Mr Mayor, councillors, and with the greatest respect to my ward colleague in raising the issue, I certainly do support the Frankham Street being considered with a review that council is about to undertake in relation to some of the impacts and some of the perhaps anomalies in terms of the residential growth areas. But councillors, that study will not take place this side of January, and so therefore there is no need to consider this as an urgent motion. The fact that there is a compulsory conference at VCAT in relation to a property in Frankham Street is irrelevant, because what we're talking about here is a review that the council will undertake, that Frankham Street should be added to that review, and it may or may not lead to a recommendation that may or may not lead to a planning scheme amendment. Councillors, I'm loath to open the floodgates for councillors to raise an issue at any time under urgent business when it's not particularly urgent. So, councillors, nothing will happen this side of January. There is an opportunity for this to come before councillors in due course, and I'd urge you to reject the motion for urgent business.
Thank you, Councillor Munro. Are there speakers in favour of the motion?
Yes, Mayor.
Councillor Bennett.
It's always a difficult situation when two ward councillors don't agree on a particular issue. I tend to take the viewpoint that if we have one of the ward councillors who believe that an issue is urgent and is necessary to address, then that should be supported as a default position. Because there's no harm being done in actually raising that as an item of business that needs to be considered, and given that basically 2 months can be lost over the Christmas period, I think we need to consider that the urgency takes precedence over any other aspect, so I would support the urgency of this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Are there any speakers against the motion?
Yes, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Stennett.
Look, my understanding that urgent business has a particular purpose, and it's to deal with issues that have arisen since the publication of the council agenda that can't be safely held over until the next meeting. Now, if this was so urgent, you know, there are other ways that councillors could have put this on the agenda, for example, a notice of motion. It could have been done earlier. From the arguments that Councillor Masood is putting forward, it sounds like this is an existing issue that council is aware of, that we're going to deal with in due course, and it doesn't sound like it fits within the purpose of what urgent business should be about. Now, I guess some people could take the view, what does it matter? What's the harm? The harm is that it has a particular purpose on the agenda. The agenda is put to the public and so they can see it as well. It's an issue of transparency, an issue of, well, if we let this item slip through, then all of us could potentially have items that we would like to have on the council agenda that perhaps we haven't thought of until the meeting night that we'd like to put forward. But then if we do that, there's no opportunity for any of us or even the public to have a look at the agenda before it's published or after it's published, and no opportunity to have I guess, an informed and considered debate and discussion. And so this has sort of come, I guess, out of left field, and I'm not happy to support this because I don't feel it fits in within what urgent business is really supposed to be.
Thank you, Councillor Stennett. Are there any speakers in favour of the motion? Any further speakers? There being none, I will ask Councillor Masood for a right of reply. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. It was not something, when I got up this morning, I thought I was going to be put up, but I was at a meeting and discussing again the issues of this street, and to be honest, I see so many conflicts and I think we need to look at it, and delaying it by 2 months I don't think is helpful. And I would definitely like the opportunity to discuss what the issues are about that street and why it needs to be added into the particular review, which I will talk more fully if I'm able to put this motion up as an item of urgent business. I think it is sad when it is relating to, in the longer term, potentially perhaps safety of residents, and that is why I believe the review should occur, and I appreciate the support I've had from a couple of colleagues here, that I just think it won't hurt to have. I was not aware that I was even going to be putting it up today. It actually arose today through discussions, and thus I decided I didn't want to wait 2 months. I consider it important for the community, and we need to recognise when there are these sorts of situations, which are rare, and I guess if I get an opportunity to put the motion up, I can talk in more detail.
Thank you, Councillor Masood. I'll put the motion to the vote, and the motion is to admit an item of urgent business. Those in favour? Against? I declare the motion lost. The next item on the agenda is council reports. Councillors, we have a number of reports to consider tonight listed under City Development, Infrastructure, Human Services and Corporate. I will introduce each report in the order listed in the agenda, and then we'll call for a motion in regard to the item. Item 9.1.1, 826 to 834 Whitehorse Road, Box Hill, buildings and works to construct a building comprising of 30 stories plus 5 levels of a basement, car parking, use of land for accommodation and an associated reduction of car parking requirements. Can I have a mover?
Happy to move.
Councillor Munro move. A seconder?
Happy to second.
Councillor Ellis to second. Councillor...
Mr Mayor, I have a few amendments that I would
Yes.
like to add to the substantive.
I will call for amendments after the substantive motion, which has been moved and seconded. Once the moving and the seconding speech has been undertaken, I will then call for amendments. Without preempting you, Councillor Munro, I understand that the motion you've moved, the substantive, included some slight changes.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And as the screen's going on, I suspect that the the additions will be added. So, councillors,
Councillor
I'll speak
Munro.
to the motion. I'll speak to the wording, not move the motion just at the moment, if you'd like. You'd like me to highlight?
Your motions...
Yes, Mr Mayor, I was going to say that the motion is as per the report with the 2 additions in yellow, and I'll read those 2 additions for the benefit of the meeting.
Thank you, Councillor
And for the
Munro.
benefit of the audio recording. And that is under item B, under 1, there is the addition of A and B. A being a minimum setback of 4.5 metres between the centre line of Fairbank Lane and the 3 apartments located at the western end of level 5. This setback includes balconies. B, a minimum setback of 4.5 metres between the centre line of Fairbank Lane and the tower levels above the podium. I so move the amended motion.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor Munro. I recognise the motion you have moved. Can I please have your moving speech? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I'll be fairly brief because I think, as was highlighted, there may be some additional amendments and that will take some time to debate. What we have before us at 826 to 834 Whitehorse Road, Box Hill, 2 lots of subdivision. There are building works proposed to construct a 30-storey building plus 5 levels of basement car parking with dwellings and commercial uses within that development. And there is a reference to car parking reduction requirements. Councillors, it is a substantial building, and I note there were 21 objections in relation to this application, and a planning forum was held, chaired by Councillor Barker in November. I also note that in the officer's recommendation around this planning application, there are quite a number of pages of conditions to the granting of a permit. We're up to 66, I can see, or 65, and then there's some notes in relation to the permit over the other side. Councillors, it is a substantial building, but there are some features that are quite important to the livability and to the community, both within the complex and without. There are substantial additions proposed, and also importantly, there is and I understand the applicant proposed to council the provision of the affordable housing units as part of the development, and council is very pleased to be able to have that as part of a development within our community. The report is there. I know councillors have seen it, and there is great interest with the ward councillors with a number of amendments, so I so move, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Munro. Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think Councillor Munro has covered it quite well. You do note that there are 2 amendments on the screen at the moment, the yellow highlighted. They have been agreed to by the applicant, and I understand that some of the objectors have withdrawn their objection as a result of those amendments. I think that shows that the applicant's going a fair way to work with the community. A particular interest to me is the provision of the 10 affordable housing units, because that was voluntarily provided, and I think it's important to note that that the applicant themselves has offered us 10 affordable housing units in recognition of the shortfall in our area, in the eastern region, and I'm quite delighted with that. And but you know, as I said, it's impressive that he or she or they have actually brought that to the table up front in this whole discussion. So I ask my colleagues to support this application.
Mr Mayor?
Mr Mayor, can I raise a point of order or a question of officers first, which I think is material to the motion moved?
Councillor Munro, you can ask a question.
Yeah, so, Mr Mayor, I just need to seek clarification, as I have moved the amendment on the screen with B1, A and B. I guess is what's not clear, and I need some guidance for officers. In terms of the other points that are in the written agenda, are they all pushed down by one? Okay, so I didn't announce that, and I wasn't clear. So A to T, all are incremented by 2 alpha characters, I take it.
Thank you, Councillor Munro. I do recognise Councillor Liu had put her light on and spoke before your point of order, so I'll come back to Councillor Liu.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have a couple of amendments that I would like to add to the substantive.
Thank you, Councillor Liu. Can I ask that the amendments are put on the screen and you make a brief introduction only, and then I will call for a seconder.
Sure. So it's essentially looking at 2 amendments. One is to look at an incorporation of green walls into the building's external design and function to be designed to the satisfaction of the responsible authority. And B, a community engagement strategy in accordance with condition 65, which I will further elaborate.
Thank you, Councillor Liu. Is there a seconder for the amendment?
I'm happy to second.
Councillor Bennett, recognise you as a seconder for the amendment. Councillor Liu, leading speech.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillors, this proposal, in particular the amendments that I put up, I'll go through the first one. Now, as you know, I'm very supportive of initiatives that looks at more or expanded plantings, particularly with such large developments such as this, as I think that, you know, it does provide a greener, healthier, as well as a more aesthetically pleasing design. So, so I felt that this amendment would be a good addition to this particular development and its surrounds. Now, the second point regarding the community engagement strategy, this proposed amendment looks at encouraging developers to really better engage with the wider community, in particular with large-scale developments such as this particular application. While I acknowledge that there has been proposed at least 10 affordable housing units, I think developers, as well as all levels of government, needs to look at strategies on how developments like this can benefit the broader community in the long run. This amendment provides an opportunity for developers, as well as council, to work closer together with the local community. So it's whether it's community groups, not-for-profit organisations, government bodies, and or businesses, to really look at opportunities, particularly in the commercial spaces, by uses that will not only benefit the people that are living in the complex, but the wider community and the workers within the municipality. So that could be, you know, including but not limited to the health and education services. I think it's also important for us to look at how developments such as these would ensure that locals can really have easier access to essential services for future needs, as well as the future prosperity of Whitehorse. So I certainly urge my councillors to support these 2 amendments. I think they're quite important, and I think it would certainly add more benefit to the community in the long run. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Liu. Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I support Councillor Liu's amendments, basically because we need, I believe, with any of these major developments in Box Hill and other areas, but we need to put people first. And any alternative or any recommendation that's going to improve the amenity for people who live and work and play in Box Hill or visit even. I think those recommendations to improve this particular motion are a good thing. So greening the city, and particularly in Box Hill, I think is very important, and Councillor Liu's alternatives go a long way to doing that. Also, the fact that there will be a community engagement strategy is very important. That with any development, that people are involved in getting the best outcomes for the city, and in particular the Box Hill CBD. So I support that on that basis, because it is important, not just with this development, but with the overall vision of Whitehorse over the next 10 or more years. It's important we take into account those things that are going to affect people living in that area, and for the way that Box Hill will work from a people perspective as we move forward down the years. So I would encourage councillors to consider their vision of what Box Hill will look like in the years to come. So I seek your support.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Are there any speakers against this amendment? Councillor Barker.
Thanks, Mayor. Mayor, I thank Councillor Lew and Councillor Bill for putting this up, but there are a couple of fundamental problems with it. In the transport plan that's been submitted with this application, there are 170 bicycle parking spots available. This amendment to put 20% of them in front of the entrances to the retail access.
Councillor Barker, I'll call a point of order. The comments on the 20%, I understand that the 20%'s in the substantive motion, and in item B1K on page 5 of the agenda. So may I ask that you keep your comments to the amendments that Councillor Lew's put up. Thank you.
It's just a bit misleading, Mayor, because it's okay. I suppose, look, and you know I'm a huge advocate, and I'll be moving an amendment shortly about these green living walls. But these the green walls, as it's called in this amendment, aren't necessarily to the extent of the building. They're not to the height of the building. They're not necessarily visible to the surrounding areas on maturation, and they don't necessarily provide enhanced environmentally sustainable development outcomes. So this is a less than ambitious amendment in terms of, a green wall. There are green walls already sort of in this. If you've had a look at the detailed plans, I think we can be far, far more ambitious on that. And I think if we get to another amendment, Mayor, that will be more. It will be better, and it would provide more extensive plantings. Will provide better wind outcomes, less glare outcomes, improved amenity for the residents, better outcome for the developer, and better outcome for the surrounding areas. Councillors, this isn't as ambitious as it could be, and I'd encourage you not to support it.
Thank you, Councillor Barker. Are there any speakers in favour of these amendments? Any further speakers on these amendments? As this is an amended, a motion to amend, there is no right of reply, so we'll put the motion. I'll put the amendments to the vote. All those in favour? Against? The amendments are carried. This, councillors, these amendments are now incorporated into the substantive motion.
Mayor, move an amendment.
I'm recognising as a amendment from moved by Councillor Barker. Before I call for a seconder, can I ask Councillor Barker to give a brief introduction on the amendments that you propose to move?
Oh, thank you, Mayor. This amendment effectively will now amend the substantive that Councillor Lew just moved in terms of green walls. It's a far more ambitious. It's a far more ambitious amendment, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Barker, there's, for the audience to look at the amendments and the councillors, I understand there's a written form proposed, and I would like to understand which version of your written form it is.
Sorry, Mayor, it's B.
Thank you, Councillor Barker. Is there a seconder for these amended motion, these amendments, proposed amendments? Councillors, as there is no seconder for the amendments, the amendment lapses. May I call for speakers against the substantive motion? Is there any speakers for the motion either for or against? There is no speakers either for or against, I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Against? I declare the motion carried. Item 912, 345 Whitehorse Road, Nunawading. May I seek a mover?
Yes, happy to move, Mayor.
Councillor Cutts moved, and I seek a seconder.
Yep, happy to second, Mayor.
Councillor Stennett seconded. Councillor Cutts.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I move that we support the officer recommendation to refuse the motion to amend the planning permit issued at the direction of VCAT in December 2013, the application of which was previously refused by Council under delegation for the installation of 2 floodlit sky signs at the top of the Bob Jane T-Mart buildings at the corner of Springvale and Whitehorse Roads to be replaced with 2 electronic sky signs. There's nothing about size, height above the ground, number of signs, as the 2 floodlit signs have been given approval but are yet to be constructed. We just need to determine whether Council agree that the signs be changed from floodlit to electronic. The subject site is at the corner, as I mentioned, of Springvale and Whitehorse Roads. Is one of the busiest intersections in the city of Whitehorse. These are both major arterial Category 1 roads. Each sign is over 42 square metres in area and will be very imposing signs indeed. The signs will be set in a V shape with one facing southeast and another facing southwest. The amendment to change the signs from floodlit to electronic, however, was received earlier this year and was subsequently advertised with 5 objections, which triggered a planning consultation forum which I chaired. The 3 main themes in objectors' comments were that the electronic sign will cause an increase in distraction to drivers at an already busy intersection. The signs will increase the ugliness, visual clutter and pollution of the area, and they will set a precedent for the future, opening the floodgates to more sky signs at other major intersections in Whitehorse. Can I just say that advertising signs are by their very nature designed to attract attention, and therefore they increase distractibility of drivers. A changing sign, as opposed to a static sign, will increase distractibility further. As the VCAT member stated in the report of the decision to grant the planning permit in 2013, and I quote, "I find that the proposed floodlighting of the sign would be of a form of illumination that would be less obtrusive than internal illumination and far less obtrusive than if the sign were electronic and or animated. It can therefore be assumed, or not unreasonable to assume, that VCAT member found that the signs were acceptable because they were not electronic or animated, and therefore may not have been approved had the signs been of these type." Statistics around the usage of this intersection is staggering. I've asked officers, and thank you very much for all your support, to provide me with information around statistics at this intersection. Monday last week, the 4th of December, 2017, in the 24-hour period, had 21,559 vehicle movements through the intersection. I thought that this was much less than that, but in fact that is what it was. And in fact, some left-hand turning lane movements nor some through traffic were actually not included in that figure, so the figure would actually be higher. Given the number of distractions already in the car, sat-navs, iPads, mobile phones, the last thing that drivers need is further external distraction. This intersection has sadly had its share of accidents and deaths and serious injuries over the years. We do not want to unnecessarily increase the risk to our own residents nor others passing through the area. We all know that distracted drivers, along with those under the influence of alcohol and drugs, increase the dangers on our roads. Distracted drivers are more likely to cause accidents, they're more likely to die, and they're more likely to kill and injure other people. We do not want this in our community. If these electronic signs were to be approved, they would be a first in the City of Whitehorse and will no doubt set a precedent, one that no one I have spoke to wants. I understand that only 2 such signs have been brought to Council in the past and both were not approved. As elected representatives of our community, we as councillors have an obligation to reflect our residents' wishes, and with the conversations I've had, they do not want such signs. They will set a precedent. They are ugly, imposing and majorly distracting, particularly at a very busy and dangerous intersection such as Springvale and Whitehorse roads. Councillors, I'm asking you to please support this refusal motion. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Cutts. Councillor Stennett.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll be brief. Councillor Cutts has been quite comprehensive. But I would like to talk about the issue of driver distraction. I did look up some statistics and some information, and the Assistant Victoria Commissioner Police, Fryer, talked about minor mistakes with fatal consequences, and he was talking about driver distraction of all kinds. 14% of all crashes involve drivers being distracted, and 30% of these are distraction from outside the vehicles. As Councillor Cutt said, there's all sorts of distractions in the vehicle, and now we're dealing with distractions outside of the vehicle as well. VCAT, in their original motion, when they set aside Council's decision in 2013, they did seem to suggest there was a graduation in the type of signs that existed from non-flood lit to flood lit to internally lit to electronic and illuminated. And it's this last category that they pointed at and said that's really the worst there is. And it's, you know, even if we were looking at internally lit signs, they may perhaps have refused that sign. We don't know. What we do know is they set aside Council's decision. It was quite disappointing. It was quite a shock because even a sign of that size and at that location was totally against Council's local policies, and it was these local policies that were completely ignored. However, I do have some hope that if VCAT have some sort of consistency in the decision-making process, they will look back at their original decision in 2013 and go back to those words of their VCAT member, which certainly to me and to any reasonable person would suggest that the decision was made on the basis that it was only a flood-lit sign. I remain disappointed, however, with their original decision. If you spend 2 seconds glancing away from the road at 60 kilometres an hour, you're effectively driving blind for 33 metres. And the speed limit along that part of the road is 80 kilometres per hour in one direction and 70 kilometres per hour in the other direction. So we'll come back to the police statement talking about minor mistakes with fatal consequences. Is that what we want in Whitehorse? To be known as the crash fatality capital of Victoria? I don't think so.
Thank you, Councillor Stennett. Are there any speakers against the motion? Any speakers in favour of the motion? Being no speakers against the motion, I propose that we put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. Item 9.2.1, Tender Evaluation Report, Box Hill Town Hall Community Kitchen Refurbishment. Can I have a mover?
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Liu, a seconder.
Happy to second.
Councillor Ellis. Councillor Liu.
Thank you. Councillors, in 2015, an OH&S audit was conducted in the main kitchen area at the Box Hill Town Hall, which subsequently identified a number of hazards and non-compliance issues. Community consultation was then undertaken with user groups, caterers, event chefs, council, support staff and event planners to consider the functionality of the kitchen. Through the audit and community consultation, it was determined that a significant upgrade was required to meet the current health, safety and building standards, as well as address the current catering capabilities and future needs. Tenders were open on the 27th of September this year and closed on the 18th of October this year. All tenderers were pre-qualified specialised commercial builders selected from the state government's construction supplies register. We received 3 tenders and subsequently the tenderers were evaluated on a number of criteria. Ducon Building Solutions came out on top, demonstrating their past experience in delivering similar projects for other councils, specifically working around live environments. A reference check was also conducted, as well as a financial viability report, and Ducon was also deemed to be the best value for money for this project. The total expected project expenditure is $720,000, excluding GST. Councillors, as you all know, Box Hill Town Hall is an iconic landmark and it's also very popular for community functions and events. Some of the feedback that we've heard from community groups is that the catering limitations at the Town Hall. This refurbishment will address these issues and provide more scope and flexibility in terms of catering in-house for events, functions and community use moving forward. So I support this motion and I urge my fellow councillors to support it also. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Liu. Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think Councillor Liu has covered it all quite well. It's a very loved building. We're so proud of our town hall. It's iconic and a lot of community groups want to use it. And the fact is that our kitchen's dated, it's got some hazards attached to it, and it's very important that we get it up to state of the art to ensure that it is well utilised by our groups. This particular tender process has been undergone throughout quite an extensive period, and we've selected the tenderer, and I think we should all just vote to allow this works to proceed, and we can go and visit our magnificent town hall and see the brand new kitchen. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Any speakers against the motion? Any speakers in favour of the motion?
Mayor, I'd like to just make a couple of points if I could.
Yes, Councillor Bennett.
Thanks, Mayor. Look, the report does state that it's important to have a venue that has catering facilities that meets the need of the community, and that is correct. It's also important, I think, that we, in a competitive environment, it makes good business sense to set a high standard and build trust with the people that use the town hall facilities, that we can handle events and other things in a competent and professional manner. And I'm mindful that our other great building, the Whitehorse Centre, will be inoperable for a number of years while it's being reconstructed, so that we need to emphasise that the town hall kitchen can handle the sorts of major events that can be held there in a professional manner. So I fully support the budget and the tender for ensuring that we bring our Box Hill Town Hall kitchen up to a very high standard. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Are there any further speakers? Councillors, as there's been no speakers against the motion, I propose to put the motion straight to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. 9.2.2, Tender Evaluation Report, Concrete Paving and Curbing services. Can I have a mover?
Happy to move, Mayor.
Councillor Masood moved. Can I have a seconder?
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Carr seconded. Councillor Masood.
Thank you, Mayor. This is regarding tender evaluation of concrete paving and curbing services. Officers have evaluated 11 tenderers from a range of service providers and have provided 6 contractors as the final list from which we can choose to engage and get them to provide the necessary works over the life of the contract, which I'm pretty sure was 3 years plus a potential couple of years extension. We need several providers. That's why there's the list of 6, because sometimes there are multiple projects happening simultaneously. Also, some of the contractors may have more expertise slightly in one area than another, so it gives us a range of choice. And I think it's been well evaluated. The tenders were evaluated against their offer, their experience in undertaking similar work that we require, the quality of their work, the resources available for the contract, and also their OC health and safety and equal opportunity criteria, I guess, was evaluated. And they all provided experience in the provision of a range and type of services at a quality that we expect. So they were considered to provide the best value for money for the duration of the contract, and I urge my councillors to support the officer report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Masood. Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, as you would know, and I'm sure other councillors around the table know, City of Whitehorse has 1,717 kilometres of footpaths, 1,183 kilometres of curb and channel, and 611 kilometres of roads. As you would also be aware, we are unfortunately an ageing population, and we need to ensure and address that the cracked, displaced and hazardous footpaths and curb and channel are addressed, that these issues are addressed. The term of the contract, as Councillor Masood has mentioned, is 3 years, commencing on the 14th of February 2018, with an option to extend the contract for a further 2 years, or less at Council's discretion, subject to satisfactory performance by the contractor. And so, to provide flexibility of service, it is considered appropriate to appoint a panel of contractors as listed in the councillor report. I'm more than happy to second this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Are there any speakers against the motion? Any speakers in favour of the motion? There being no speakers, I'll propose to put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. 9.2.3, Tender Evaluation Report, Minor Asphalt Works. May I please have a mover?
Happy to move.
Councillor Ellis moved. Can I have a seconder?
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Carr seconded. Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As you're aware, Council has a significant amount of asphalt and pavements and footpaths throughout our very, very large municipality, and obviously they come under need of repair frequently, and we have sent out invitations for tenders on the 7th of October, and after a 4-week period, almost 4-week period, they closed. And the tenders, of which there were 7, were evaluated against a number of criteria, which included what they offered, their experience and the quality of the tenderer's work. And in this case, Asphalt Constructions of Davies Lane, Hoddles Creek has turned out to be the successful applicant or tenderer for this process, and we do authorise the Chief Executive Officer to award an extension of the contract to them, and hopefully they will keep our municipality shipshape. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, this is very similar to the previous motion that we've just passed. We have significant, as Councillor Ellis has said, asphalt road pavements and footpaths. This contract is for the minor asphalt work such as the patching and repair work to road pavements and footpaths, as well as an allocation for the renewal and upgrade, which is so important for our city for the reasons given before. We are an ageing population. We need to protect people in our municipality, road users, pedestrians, everyone. And without investing in their repair and maintenance work, we won't be able to do that. It's important that we continue to maintain our roads and our footpaths to a standard very acceptable, in fact more so than acceptable, to as best we possibly can with the money available. And you can't, maintaining is the only way to go. You can't just ignore this a bit of work and then come back in 6 months' time or 12 months' time and do a catch-up. It doesn't work. You can't catch up. You've just got to continually maintain that level of continual maintenance, and that's the only way that we will survive, I think, properly as a municipality. So I'm more than happy to support the contract, which, similar to the one before, is 3 years, commencing again on the 14th of February next year, with an option to extend the contract for a further 2 years or less at Council's discretion. AA Asphalt Constructions at Davies Lane, Hoddles Creek, has been appointed as the successful contractor, and more than happy to second. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Are there any speakers against the motion? Any speakers in favour of the motion? Being no further speakers, I propose to put the motion straight to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. Item 9.3.1, Tender Evaluation Report, Supply and Delivery of Sandwiches, Finger Food and Meals. I seek a mover.
Happy to move.
Councillor Masood, a seconder.
Happy to second.
Happy. Yeah.
Councillor Barker. Councillor Masood.
Thank you, Mayor. Again, it's another tender evaluation report. I think as a council we recognise a lot of our residents and invite them to come and, I think, engage with us, and we do provide finger food and things like that, and we have times when we need to do this. We have evaluated the tenders against the benefit to council, the experience of the tenderer, the understanding of course, food handling, which is extremely important these days. We're very aware of the consequences if it's not done properly. The quality of their food services, food presentation, and again, we always hold highly the criteria for occupational health and safety and equal opportunity, and the viability of the business too. So there are 2 tenderers that have been identified as providing the best value for money for this contract, and one is Smart Brown Catering and the other is G'day Chef. I think it is a function which is important to our community at times when we come together, and certainly we have had services from these caterers in the past, and I have to say I think we've never found anything failing our expectations, and so I certainly support the officer's recommendation and ask my fellow councillors to also support this officer report.
Thank you, Councillor Masood. Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, I recommend this to all councillors. Everyone that saw the procurement policy pass through here would realise that the threshold for these sorts of tenders is $250,000 a year. So clearly council's spending more than, or about $5,000 a week on sandwiches. Now, if you put it in those terms, Mayor, I nearly fell off my chair. But as Councillor Masood said...
Point of order, Mr Mayor, that's not correct. We do not spend $5,000 a week on sandwiches. We spend it on a variety of food.
Hang on, Councillor Carr. I recognise a point of order. Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As I just said, we do not spend $5,000 a week on sandwiches. We spend it on a variety of food for a number of community groups. It's not just on council workers, council officers, councillors. It is for a number of community groups which we entertain, and we do it very well, and we need a standard and a quality of food that is purporting to this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Recognise a point of order. Councillor Barker.
Mayor, I won't bother responding to the point of order because if the other councillor had actually listened to what was about to come, it wouldn't have been relevant. But I would draw, Councillor Massoud's point, the Supports Awards night, the community liaison and the mayor's function with all of those football clubs and whatnot. Australia Day. And of course, it isn't councillors or council staff eating those sandwiches or light foods or whatever they may be. Council actually effectively resells these food products, if you like, Mayor, to people that hire, say, the Whitehorse Centre or the Town Hall, and they have a meeting and they've got 100 people for lunch. They actually, we actually provide, we buy the sandwiches through our tendered agreement, which is this one, and effectively on-sell it as a part of the value add in terms of the venue hire. Now that's a very, very considerable portion of this spend, which is why I support it, and I urge all other councillors to support this motion. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Barker. Any speakers against the motion? Any speakers in favour of the motion?
Yes, Mayor.
Councillor Cutts.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, there are many functions that we hold here for many of our community groups, and one such was the volunteers thank you, the Christmas thank you, and the food that was presented today and years past when I came as a volunteer, when I was the chair of the Parklands Advisory Committee in Heatherdale, Creek Parklands area. The food is very, very appropriate to what people expect, and occupational health and hygiene areas, all of that, that is exactly what we should be doing with council. We have standards which we need to uphold, and I would like to recommend that we accept this motion. Thank you.
Any further speakers against the motion? Any further speakers?
Yes, Mr Mayor.
In favour?
In favour.
Okay, Councillor Ellis.
Look, I just want to follow on from the comments that was mentioned before. A lot of this catering is going to the Whitehorse Centre and also to the Box Hill Town Hall, and as was mentioned by Councillor Barker, it is sold to community groups. It's sold to people that wish to use our facilities, and therefore there is no cost to council. For the bulk of this, there is no cost to council. We just need to ensure that we have got tenderers that can provide meals up to a high standard for members of the community, whether it be a few sandwiches for morning tea for our volunteers, or whether it be fully catered large events that are paid for by large community groups or groups within our community. So I urge my colleagues to support this, and the two selected tenderers which have a history of providing us with very high standard food. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Are there any further speakers? Councillors, as there are no speakers against this motion, there is no right of reply, and I'll put the motion to the vote. Those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. (9.4.1) Delegated decisions. Sorry.
Point of order.
9.3.2 2017 Annual Food Hygiene Assessment Award. Can I have a mover?
Yes, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. And a seconder?
Yes, Mayor.
Councillor Barker. Councillor Bennett.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I thought I was going to miss out my moment in the sun there for a minute. But after we've been talking about food, councillors, it's my great pleasure to move that Council endorses this report and recommends 3 food businesses for the Food Premises of the Year Award for 2017. The 3 businesses are Starfish Early Learning Centre in Nunawading, Matto Ristorante in Vermont, and Vermont South Community House in Vermont South. And all these awards acknowledge excellence in food hygiene and are an important part of our food hygiene assessment program. Also, certificates of commendation for those businesses achieving a 5-star rating will also be awarded to 39 businesses throughout the municipality. So, councillors, it's pleasing to note that we're on the upward trend as far as compliant businesses are concerned. So 93.1% of businesses actually are compliant in the City of Whitehorse. Our environmental health officers conducted nearly 400 inspections to ensure acceptable food hygiene standards are maintained. And we do have a non-compliance policy, and it's pleasing to note in my mind that we concentrate on education and information to businesses and being proactive to promote the importance of food safety. So I endorse this carrot and stick approach, I guess, and also rewarding excellence for the Food Hygiene Awards, all part of this strategy. So overall, a good news story, and congratulations to those 3 premises who have won the Food Premises of the Year Award for this year. So I seek your support for this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Mayor. I think Councillor Bennett's covered that really well. Food safety in our city is just so important because we've seen where there's been outbreaks of food poisoning or from inappropriate handling of food. And I first hand have seen our health officers inspecting my cricket club, Mayor, which I thought was excellent because they actually did it on a weekend as well. And that's so important, particularly when you look at childcare facilities, you look at nursing homes and the people that actually serve meals in our city, and the absolute, the devastation that can happen when these things aren't done correctly. And I wholeheartedly support the surveillance and the reward situation mechanism, and I urge all councillors to support it. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Barker. Are there any speakers against the motion? Any speakers in favour of the motion?
Yes, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Liu.
Yes, look, I wholeheartedly support this motion. I think often you hear stories, horror stories of non-compliant establishments, but this is a good, this is a really good story to tell, and it's great to see that, almost 70% of all food premises in this area that's been assessed achieved an excellent rating, and that's increasing. I'd also like to make a mention that, speaking with some food proprietors that have moved to the City of Whitehorse, they have commented that the standards, we had very high standards here, and the most important part is that the environmental health team are also very proactive, which I think is very important. So, as I said, a great news story, and hopefully we can continue with the upward trend. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Liu. Are there any further speakers in relation to the motion? There being no further speakers and no councillor has spoken against the motion, I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. Item 9.4.1, Delegated Decisions, October 2017. Can I have a mover?
Happy to move, Mayor.
Councillor Massoud. Can I have a seconder?
Happy to second.
Councillor Cutts. Councillor Massoud.
Mayor, this is really more procedural. I don't think it requires any speaking to. There is a list of the delegated decisions, and I'll leave it at that.
Councillor Cutts.
Yes, Mayor, nothing further to add.
Thank you, Councillor Cutts. Are there any speakers against the motion? In favour of the motion? Are there any speakers in favour of the motion? Being no speakers on the motion, I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. Councillors, the next item on the agenda are reports from delegates, special committee, recommendations and assembly of councillor record. 10.1, reports by delegates. And councillors, just to remind you that only those councillors that are appointed to council and are delegates to various committees report on this particular item, and I encourage councillors to be brief in their reports and talk about the meetings that they have attended in capacity of delegates, and try to refrain from being talking about functions where you've attended where it hasn't been just a delegate. I will start on my left. Councillor Ellis.
No delegate reports, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Councillor Liu.
Nothing to report, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Liu. Councillor Barker.
Just very briefly, Mayor, in terms of the Arts Committee, I attended the first of those meetings, humbly assisting the good Councillor Carr. It was my first meeting, and it was a very steep learning curve, Mayor. Without stealing Councillor Carr, who's I would like to think I'm very much an understudy for at the moment, Mayor, but I do look forward to growing my responsibilities there. That's all, Mayor.
Councillor Bennett.
Thanks, Mayor. Just one report from the MOV Environment Committee that I attended earlier this month. There was a presentation from Professor Chris Walsh from Melbourne Uni talking about the stormwater impacts on the urban environment. And his view is that the aim should be to retain urban stormwater and keeping it in the ground by maximising permeable surfaces rather than putting it into streams and rivers. His point of planning for a 1 in 5 year stormwater event in urban areas and comparing that with a 1 in 100 year flood event for river systems. So there are a number of other presentations from DELP, State Environment Protection, and Moreland City Council about their integrated water management approach. And I'm sure our officers would be familiar with that. But that's to mitigate urban heat island effects, and they have a heat map data for their municipality that looks at the wet and dry areas of the city of Moreland. Very interesting presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. And I do note the MAV delegateship is one for that committee in your own right and not appointed by council, but I did allow you to continue on this occasion.
Thank you for allowing me to get away with that.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have two. As Councillor Barker has mentioned, we did on Wednesday, the 22nd of November, we did have our Visual Arts Committee meeting, and I did feel a bit sorry for Councillor Barker. I didn't tell him this is the first public occasion that I've mentioned this, that I think he was a little bit shocked because we did spend quite a bit of money that night, I have to say. We purchased several pieces of work, but what Councillor Barker, we did try and explain it to him, we had been patiently waiting on these pieces of work to become available, and as luck or whatever, it was just ironic, they all became available at the same time. And so we eagerly purchased them and voted on it, and the committee was pretty much unanimous in purchasing all the pieces. So I think poor old Councillor Barker was a little bit shocked at the amount of money, but we did explain to him that it was an annual allowance, and we still have a few $1,000s left to spend before the end of the year, but it was a good meeting, and it went very, very well, I must say. I also attended on the 30th of November, Thursday, a professional development meeting at the MAV.
Councillor Carr, professional, in regard to which delegateship?
I beg your pardon?
Which delegateship?
As the MAV appointed and the council appointed representative of council at the professional development reference group committee meeting.
Yeah, sorry, Councillor Carr. As I indicated to Councillor Bennett, the MAV delegateships are ones that we have in our own in our own right, and it's not council appointed.
Okay, I thought
Yep.
we approved it and I have reported on them in the past.
Yes,
That's fine,
right.
I accept that, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Councillor Stennett.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Nothing to report.
Councillor Carr, Cutts. Councillor Cutts.
Nothing to report. Thank you.
Councillor Masood.
Thank you, Mayor. I have one report for the Disability Advisory Committee on the 6th of December. And as it is or was the last meeting for the existing committee, we started off with some member reflections, and I would like to just go through a few of these points because there will be a new committee appointed. People will be invited if they're interested in applying, and I think it's good for the community to hear how members of these committees, our community members, actually value their experience. So some of the member reflections from our committee were that it had developed their confidence to share communication with other groups on the issues that needed to be addressed in terms of disability. It also helped to inform them about what was happening in the community and at government levels. Another comment was that it had provided a bridge really after having left full-time work, etc. And I guess this is why we love our volunteers, that they decide to now give back to the community by being on a committee, and they found that really useful because it still provided them with the opportunity to have professional discussions in an area where they have expertise. It also, the comments were that it brought state and national level discussions to the local people, and also that for some of the committee members who are on state and national boards, that they could take some of the local issues to those levels of government. They felt that they had learnt from others on the committee about the vastness really of disability, because we have quite diverse representation on that committee, and so there is learning to have. And they also felt it was very good the way we are, in an ongoing way, always doing reviews of accessibility, and the fact that we do get to look at projects often at the concept stage and feed in very early on to the projects we're doing within Whitehorse to make sure that they cater appropriately for those with a disability. And then we also reviewed our disability action plan, which will be in draft form in the new year, sort of early-ish in the new year, and will come out. And we did a bit of an NDIS update, and I think it was a very good meeting where members shared, and I think some of them showed they were very keen to be involved again in the future if they get the opportunity. But I think it's good to hear that our volunteers are getting some value by being on the committee and having those discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Munro.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Two items to report. The first was the MAV regional meeting on the 22nd of the 11th, held at Banyule Council. I attended with the CEO, Ms Duff. It was actually quite a productive meeting. Not all councils were in attendance, but certainly Banyule, Manningham and Whitehorse were there in force. The MAV had met with the new local government minister that week, and it was reported to have been a positive meeting, and the minister expressed a keen desire to strengthen the relationship with the sector. The Local Government Act, the exposure draft, is to be released mid-December, and consultation 3 weeks in February. We have the MAV Act, the review and update of that is still underway. There was some discussion about metropolitan partnerships, and it's fair to say there was some concern expressed about the value of those. Mr Mayor, I'm sure you'd be interested, or perhaps it's gone, isn't it? There was mayoral training on the 7th of December. I'm not sure whether you availed yourself of that. There was some discussion about state council meetings 2 a year, and there are obviously discussions about how to make those more accessible and of interest to the members. So I can provide more details to council, but the MAV has got off to a start, and the bi-monthly meetings. The calendar for next year has gone out, and they are around the 5-member councils of our region. The second one, the Metropolitan Transport Forum, met at the Town Hall, Melbourne Town Hall, on the 6th of December. Mike Horton, the new CEO of Metro Trains, presented. They have a new 7-year contract with the government for provision of the rail services. A couple of points councillors might be interested in. They do have a target of 40% and upwards in terms of female employment by 2024 within the Metro Trains organisation across all of their sectors, including the train drivers. In fact, they've just advertised for train drivers. I think they had 5,000 applications and they're training 200 at the moment. Their performance target is 92% of trains to be within 4 minutes to 59 seconds. They're running at 91% at the moment. And I know councillors will be most interested because we talked about graffiti. They've put $10 million into their graffiti removal program, and they are aiming to get all their graffiti removed within 24 hours of it appearing. The last point, which I thought was quite interesting and perhaps quite extraordinary, they have on average 40 trespassers on the rail corridors per day. And obviously leads to great disruption. Yesterday there was one at Glenferrie that affected me. So 40 trespassers a day is quite a significant impact to our rail network. That's the end of my report.
Thank you, Councillor Munro. I have no reports. Councillors, I seek a motion to receive and note the delegates' reports.
So moved.
Moved, Councillor Munro. I seek
Happy
a
to
seconder.
second.
Councillor Ellis, seconded. Councillors, is there any discussion? If not, I will propose to put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. Item 10.1.2, Special Committee Recommendations, 4th of December 2017. There were no recommendations from the 4th of December 2017, so I will move on to item 10.3, Record of Assembly of Councillors. Councillors, I seek a motion to receive and note the Record of Assembly of Councillors.
So moved.
Happy to second.
Councillor Munro moved, and I will recognise Councillor Masood seconded. Councillor Munro, do you wish to have a moving speech?
I'm sure councillors wouldn't be enthusiastic about a moving speech, so as reported in the documentation.
Councillor Masood?
Nothing to add, Mayor.
Are there any speakers that wish to speak to this motion? I'll put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. Item 11, reports on conferences and seminars. Councillors, are there any reports on conferences and seminars? I will commence with Councillor Munro.
No report.
Councillor Masood?
No report.
Councillor Cutts?
Nothing to report, Mayor.
Councillor Stennett?
Nothing to report, Your Worship.
Councillor Carr?
Nothing to report, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Bennett?
Ditto.
Councillor Barker?
Oh, thanks very much, Mayor. Nothing to report.
Councillor Liu?
Ditto.
Councillor Ellis?
Oh, there's got to be one. Very quickly, I represented yourself this morning at a Metro Mayors and CEOs seminar looking at resilient Melbourne, and facilitated discussions were on 5 different items, areas: homelessness, safety and security, embedding resilience, growth and development, and economic transitions. And that's all I've got to say. If you've got any questions, our wonderful CEO, Ms Duff, is very familiar with all of it because she in fact was a facilitator today. So thank you. I also want to make mention of the ICTC conference that I attended, and I won't bore you with much other than make a couple of comments. Rob Adams from the City of Melbourne made a comment that Barcelona is built to 7 stories maximum limit. because, quote, the number of floors should be enough for firefighters to run up with equipment and not high rise, and that is stuck in my head. And the other comment that was made by Stuart Mosley, the CEO of Victorian Planning Authority, that only 15% of jobs are actually in the CBD and 85% are in suburbs and regions. And I'll leave you with that food for thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. I have no report. Councillors, I seek a motion to receive and note these reports.
So moved.
Happy to second.
Councillor Munro move and Councillor Liu seconded. Are there any speakers for or against? All right, I'll put it straight to the vote. Those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. The next item of the agenda is confidential reports. 12.1, City of Whitehorse Australia Day Civic Awards 2018. Councillors, I seek a motion to go into camera to consider this confidential report.
So moved.
Councillor Bennett moved.
Happy to second.
No, I'll recognise Councillor Cutts. I saw Councillor Cutts' light come on first. Councillor Cutts second. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. To the members of the gallery, you're welcome to attend after we have finished the confidential report. But if you choose not to, I do wish you all a Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year, and I hope to see you at our next council meeting, which I understand will be at the Box Hill Town Hall, and you'll be able to get details of that from our website. Thank you very much. Okay, councillors, I move to the next item of the agenda, which is to close the meeting. I now close the meeting and thank you all for attending. And I wish you all a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year for 2018. Thank you and good evening.